Mr. Speaker, June 10th was the last time the House of Commons met to deal with the legislation that we've been summoned back for today. In the meantime, the Prime Minister has been rocked by a $900 million scandal in which he gave a sole source contract to an organization that paid his immediate family members hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, the Prime Minister could have picked any day to summon members of Parliament back to work, but on his website it says that he's taking, quote, a personal day. I guess he needed another long weekend. Why is the Prime Minister taking a personal day? And I'd like to ask the Deputy Prime Minister, is everything okay?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for that question. As Deputy Prime Minister, part of my job is to be accountable to this chamber when the Prime Minister is not here. It's a privilege for me to answer questions on behalf of the government from members on the other side of the House. And I'm very happy to answer any questions the opposition has today.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
On va voir, Monsieur le Président.
Well, we'll see.
Chaque jour, on
Mr.
apprend de
Speaker.
nouveaux détails
Every
troublants
day,
concernant le
we
scandale
learn new
uni.
troubling
Cette fin de semaine,
details
Charity
about the
Intelligence,
We
un chien
Charity.
de garde
This
indépendant,
weekend,
a affirmé
Charity
avoir de
Intelligence
sérieuses préoccupations
stated
concernant
that it had
uni.
serious
Ceci
concerns
inclut des
about
normes
the We
d'actes,
Charity.
des états financiers
That includes
opaques et
the
des démissions
financial
au conseil
statements and
d'administration.
resignations from the
Est-ce
Board
que le
of
Premier ministre
Directors.
était au courant de ces
Is the
enjeux
Deputy Prime
lorsque le
Minister
cabinet a
aware
choisi
of this?
d'accorder le
Was
contrat
Cabinet
à
and
ses
Prime
amis
Minister
d'Uni?
aware of that when the contract was
vice-premier
given to
ministre.
his friends
Merci
at
pour la
We Charity?
question. Monsieur le
The
Président,
Deputy Prime
la
Minister,
fonction publique non
Mr.
partisane
Speaker,
a
the
recommandé
non-partisan public
comme le seul
service
moyen de
recommended
livrer
the We Charity as the only way of delivering the
De toute
program.
évidence,
In
la
every
façon dont cela s'est
clearly,
déroulé est
the
regrettable.
way in
Et
this
c'est
was
pourquoi
rolled
l'organisme
out
de
was
bienfaisance n'administre
regrettable,
plus le
and
projet.
this is why
L'honorable chef de
we
l'opposition.
are dealing
A
with
group
this
of people
project.
set up an organization with a charitable wing that receives money from the taxpayer. That same organization sets up a for-profit corporation that charges the charity for, quote, services. At the same time, the charity and the for-profit are gobbling up tens of millions of dollars worth of prime Toronto real estate, all the while giving a platform and endorsements to the politicians who approved the grants in the first place. Now, this isn't a plot line in a Sopranos episode, Mr. Speaker. This is the Prime Minister's current scandal. So will the Prime Minister show up at committee and testify?
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the nonpartisan public service recommended this structure as the only way to deliver the program in the required time. Obviously, the way this unfolded was regrettable, and that is why the charity is no longer administering the project. When it comes to the committee, we are cooperating with it as we ought to do.
Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it's odd that the public service would come up with this idea all on their own. Charity Intelligence, a watchdog for charitable organizations, says we has no experience delivering this kind of program. Quote, I'm not sure how you would assess the charity's track record or capability to do this if it had not previously done such work in the past. That's from the Managing Director, Kate Baheen. Now, the Liberals say it is the public service that recommended we, and yet it was we that sent a proposal to manage this program directly to Rachel Wernick on the same day that the Prime Minister announced the program. So who in the Prime Minister's office prepped we for this announcement?
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member opposite for the question. As we heard clearly last week at committee, it was the nonpartisan public service that recommended this structure as the only way to deliver the program in the required time. Let me also be clear with Canadians that the way this unfolded was regrettable, and the charity will no longer be administering the project.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Contrary to what the Deputy Prime Minister is saying, Mr. Speaker, nothing is becoming clear from testimony at the committee. In fact, on the Ethics Committee, Liberal members shamefully filibustered and ran out the clock so they wouldn't have to answer these types of questions. Getting up in the House of Commons and responding is not the same as giving an answer to very specific questions. Charity Intelligence went on to say that in 2018, the auditor flagged for the first time that We Charity was in breach of its bank covenants. That is a massive, massive red flag, end quote. Now, either the Liberals were aware of these issues and still approved the decision, or they were incompetent. It's either corruption or incompetence. Which is it?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is neither. And let me simply be clear, as we heard from Canada's excellent public service last week, it was our non-partisan public service that recommended this structure as the only way to deliver the program in the required time. Now, obviously, the way this unfolded was regrettable, and that is why it's important for me to assure Canadians that the charity is no longer administering the project.
C'est un autre exemple de gouvernement libéral qui donne des belles paroles en public, mais qui travaille pour les amis proches derrière les portes closes. Si le gouvernement libéral voulait vraiment aider les étudiants, il pouvait utiliser les programmes existants. Est-ce que le gouvernement admet aujourd'hui que ce scandale n'était pas à propos de l'aide pour les étudiants, mais c'était à propos de l'aide pour leurs amis proches?
Not helping students, but rather just helping their close friends.
Merci pour la
Deputy
question.
Prime Minister,
Monsieur le Président,
thank you so much for your
ce que
question.
notre gouvernement
Mr. Speaker,
comprend,
what
c'est
our
l'importance
government
d'aider
understands is
les
the
jeunes
importance of
Canadiens et
helping
Canadiennes
young
aujourd'hui.
Canadians
L'histoire
today.
économique montre que les
The
récessions
economic
représentent une
history
menace
indicates
particulière
that
pour les jeunes. Et pour
they
cette
are
raison,
particularly
notre
threatened
gouvernement
by the
est là
circumstances
pour
today.
cette génération.
The Liberal government is there for this young generation.
à tous les
This is a
Canadiens et
promise that we
Canadiennes.
make to all
The honourable
Canadians.
member for Burnaby South.
There were lots of ways to help students. This was not it. What was it? It was a $1 billion bailout of close friends of the Liberal Party and of the Prime Minister. People with disabilities were told to wait for months before they got help. People who saw their CERB about to end were also told to wait. People who need help were told again and again to wait by this government. But when close friends of the Liberal government and close friends of the Prime Minister need help, they jumped in with nearly $1 billion bailout. Will the government admit that this wasn't about helping students, this was about helping their close friends?
Well, Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you what this government believes in. We understand that economic recessions and depressions pose a particular threat to young people, and that is why we acted swiftly to support young Canadians. And I want to say to all young Canadians, we will not allow you to be left behind. We will not allow you to be a lost generation.
Honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, last week at Ethics Committee, Liberal members filibustered the committee in an attempt to obstruct further examination of the Prime Minister's role in awarding a sole source deal to his buddies at the We organization. This comes after Liberals blocked the Ethics Commissioner from testifying at committee regarding the Trudeau II report, where the PM was found to have broken ethics laws for a second time. Where is the Prime Minister's commitment to transparency and openness when he sends members to committee to do his dirty work?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mon collègue sait très
Thank
bien
you,
que les
Mr.
comités
Speaker.
sont
My
indépendants,
colleague
qui
knows
prennent
full well
eux-mêmes les décisions,
that the
que les
committees are
différents députés qui
independent and
siègent
that they
sur
take
ces
their
comités-là,
decisions
ils vont en
independently.
fonction
They
de leurs priorités,
operate
de leur
according to
connaissance de
their
dossier, ils
priorities,
posent
their
de bonnes
knowledge
questions,
of the
ils ont
files
des bons
before
débats,
them,
Monsieur le Président,
and
et le
they
gouvernement ne
ask
dirigera jamais
questions. The
le travail
government
des
will never
députés, puisqu'il
direct
comprend l'indépendance
members of
des comités,
Parliament's
c'est trop
work.
important pour ne pas la
The work
respecter.
of committees is
Honourable
too
member for Leeds,
important not
Grenville,
to be
Thousand Islands and
respected.
Rideau Lakes.
Well, like the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister has close family with financial ties to the We organization. Despite this, and despite his previous record of ethical breaches, the Finance Minister did not recuse himself from discussions or the decision to award a whopping $43 million taxpayer-funded bailout to the We organization. With broken bank covenants and its board in shambles, did the minister know the state of the We organization when he signed off on this plan worth $912 million taxpayer dollars?
Honourable Minister.
Speaker, as I have been clear and our government's been clear, the health and safety of all Canadians remains our priority. The Finance Committee asked for myself to come and testify. I was present. They asked for officials to come. Officials have testified. What is clear and what has been shared and stated publicly is that the non-partisan professional public service made a recommendation. We accepted their recommendation. Our focus remains on making sure that students have additional supports in this very challenging and unprecedented time. It was a contribution agreement that was signed and negotiated negotiated between the public service and We Charity. Mr. Speaker, I did sign off on that recommendation. It was the only one they provided, and after due diligence, I'm confident that they did their important work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, this new scandal is such that transparency is even more important with respect to the Prime Minister and his cabinet. Will the Prime Minister lift the veil and reveal all the truth to Canadians? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I said, that the intent was always to bring together students and an ability to access the bursary. As I have said to the committee when I was there, I was there because I was asked to appear. We asked the public service to make recommendations, and I accepted their recommendations. The Honourable Member for Carleton
says that she and the government did due diligence before granting this $912 million contribution agreement to We Charity. Did this due diligence demonstrate through the publicly available sources that We Charity had somehow accumulated over $40 million of real estate?
The Honourable Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Youth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so members of all parties passed a motion at the Finance Committee to ensure that I could appear to provide these answers. They also requested that officials appear, and officials also appeared last Thursday to provide these information in a public format so that this information could be available. As I shared at committee, and I continue to share, that the nonpartisan professional public service made a recommendation. I am confident that they did their due diligence. Any of the information that was shared with me from the public service, I shared at committee to ensure that Canadians and members could have those answers. It was a contribution agreement that was signed because our focus was on students and not-for-profits in this very challenging time.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
La question était oui ou non.
Yes, but the question was yes or no. Did the public service or did the government know that this organization had acquired more than $40 million worth of property? Perhaps we'll know the answer one day. Here's another question. If the government's telling the truth, that it respects committees, the committee invited the Prime Minister to appear to testify. So now, yes or no, will the Prime Minister appear? The Honourable
Speaker,
Minister.
As we have stated, it's very regrettable the way the situation has unfolded. As the Prime Minister has also stated that he recognizes that he should have recused himself. We know that the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner is doing an investigation. We have stated that we would comply with them. To the member's first question, any of the information that was made available to myself, I made available to committee members, and it was on their recommendation that I accepted their recommendation, because for our goal was always to deliver for Canadians, to provide an additional support to students. We recognize that not-for-profits are also facing a very challenging time, so it was an opportunity to put in a program that would help people in a very challenging time.
The We Charity scandal continues to deepen. More troubling details are being revealed daily. With their filibuster in the Ethics Committee last week, it would seem that they are hiding something embarrassing. Every minister should be asked about their connection to We. The Transport Minister, the Employment Minister, and the Foreign Affairs Minister have made it clear that they knew nothing about the Prime Minister's conflict of interest. The rest of Cabinet, however, must come clean. Can the Minister tell us if she was aware of the Prime Minister's blatant conflict of interest?
Well, Minister.
I've been clear that my focus as the Minister of Youth has been on ensuring that young people have the supports they need during this pandemic. The member asks very good questions, and that's exactly why when members of all parties supported a motion at Finance Committee to have us appear, I appeared. The first possible opportunity to have myself appear, I was there, and I made sure that my officials were there as well to answer these very questions. What is clear is that the public service made a recommendation. I accepted their recommendation because my goal will be to ensure that young people have the supports they need, and I shared all that information. It's publicly available. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Calgary Skyview.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister does not believe that the rules apply to him. Outsourcing nearly $1 billion of taxpayers' money to an organisation with not only close ties to his party but also to his family is greatly disturbing. It's always one set of rules for Liberals and another for everyone else. We've seen here today that the Liberals refuse to answer the questions we have about the scandal. When will the Prime Minister agree to testify at committee?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the health and safety of Canadians is a shared responsibility, and that's why we continue to work day in, day out to ensure that those supports are available. Members of the Finance Committee, members of all parties of the Finance Committee asked me to appear, and I appeared. Officials appeared as well. And what officials also reiterated was that they made a recommendation based on the organization having the capacity to deliver this substantial program in the timeline needed. These questions have been answered, and we will continue assuring Canadians, reminding Canadians that we will be here to support them, and the Conservatives continue to do their tactics, but we will stay focused on them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve answers after the Prime Minister got caught awarding $1 billion of taxpayers' money to We, an organization that benefited the Prime Minister politically and socially and enriched his family. The Prime Minister famously said that sunshine is the best disinfectant. So, will the Prime Minister let the sun shine in and appear before the Finance Committee to answer questions about this sordid affair, or will he continue to hide?
The Honourable Minister for Diversity, Independence and Youth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think it's important that the record state what is actually taking place. There was a substantial line item, $912 million for the Canada Student Service Grant. A vast majority of that program, that line item, was for grants to really reward students because they've been rolling up their sleeves, helping to heal communities and helping not-for-profits during this very challenging time. And it was a contribution agreement that was signed, and at maximum, which we know will not happen because We Charity is no longer delivering this program, they would have been able to receive a maximum of 43.5. Mr. Speaker, it's also important to note that the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner is investigating, and we will.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the Liberals are in trouble after handing over almost $1 billion contract to their friends at We. Meanwhile, students have to wait to get paid for the time that they have already spent working in their communities. That was time given in good faith. During COVID, students are facing disruption in their studies and lack of employment opportunities. Their futures are at stake, but Liberals prefer keeping their wealthy friends wealthy instead of helping students to make ends meet. When will the Liberals put the future of students ahead of the interests of their friends and the well-connected?
Mr. Speaker, I would like to share with the member, because she's obviously not seen the $9 billion student support program that we put forward. And so we announced $9 billion in support, including the creation of the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. We doubled Canada student grants for full and part-time students. We instituted a 6-month moratorium on Canada student loans. We increased funding for First Nations, Inuit, Métis students for post-secondary during this very challenging time. So we created an additional 10,000 additional jobs through the Canada Summer Jobs Program. Mr. Speaker, the list is long because we are here to ensure that there is a suite of programs to support students during this very challenging time. We will continue to ensure that they have those supports. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.